On the morning of May 31st, 2006, Sweden launched a police operation that still raises questions today. Not against a violent group or against a criminal network, but against a website. Just after sunrise, 53 officers walked into a Stockholm data center with orders to shut down the Pirate Bay. For months, Hollywood studios and U.S. diplomats had pushed Sweden to act, and now the government was responding. Servers were taken, racks were emptied, and staff were removed from the building. The raid lasted hours. By the afternoon, officials declared success. They believed the platform was gone for good. But 3 days later, the Pirate Bay came back online. It returned with more traffic, more support, and more attention than ever. And the raid, meant to destroy it, became the event that made it impossible to kill. This wasn't just a website anymore. It was a battle over who gets to decide how the internet works. And behind the platform at the center of this international fight was a figure who understood exactly how far this conflict could go. His name was Gottfrid Svartholm, a programmer who never planned to become a target of global pressure, but soon would. The Pirate Bay did not begin as a platform. It began as an argument. In 2003, a Swedish activist collective called Piracy, the Piracy Bureau, formed in response to what its members viewed as the increasing criminalization of information sharing. The group was not primarily technical, it was ideological. Its founders believed that copyright law had been captured by corporate interests and that the free flow of information was a fundamental right being systematically eroded. Their initial activities were modest, publishing essays, organizing debates, challenging the legal frameworks that Hollywood and the recording industry were attempting to impose on European Union member states. But ideology required infrastructure. At the time, file sharing operated through a technology called BitTorrent. Unlike earlier systems where files were stored on central servers, BitTorrent distributed content across thousands of individual users. A person downloading a file simultaneously uploaded pieces of it to others. The more users sharing a file, the faster it spread. The system was elegant, but required one centralized component, a tracker. The tracker did not store files. It simply maintained a list of which users possessed which pieces of content. Without a tracker, users could not find each other. Without users finding each other, the distributed network could not function. In 2003, most trackers were unstable, poorly maintained, and frequently shut down by legal threats or technical failures. Piracy members recognized that the movement needed a reliable, publicly operated tracker that would not collapse under pressure. 3 individuals emerged to build it. Gottfrid Svartholm, known online as Anakata, was a programmer with deep technical skills and an uncompromising attitude toward authority. Fredrik Ney, who used the handle Tiamo, specialized in hardware and network architecture. Peter Sunde, called Brokep, possessed communication abilities that others lacked. He could explain complex technical and legal concepts to journalists, politicians, and the public. Together, they launched the Pirate Bay in September 2003. The initial setup was modest, a single server running in a small hosting facility. Basic software, minimal traffic. The site attracted a few thousand Swedish users interested in sharing music, films, and software. None of the founders expected what would happen next. BitTorrent adoption was accelerating globally. Broadband internet was expanding. The demand for shared content was growing exponentially. Within months, the Pirate Bay had become one of the most visited torrent trackers in the world. The founders struggled to keep pace. They solicited donated hardware. They improvised technical solutions. They expanded server capacity through a combination of resourcefulness and luck. By 2004, the Pirate Bay was hosting millions of torrent listings and serving users across dozens of countries. What had begun as an ideological side project was becoming a global platform far beyond its creator's original vision. The growth attracted attention, and attention attracted enemies. The Pirate Bay grew differently than other torrent sites. Most trackers operated quietly. They avoided publicity. They complied with takedown requests to minimize legal exposure. They attempted to exist in the gray spaces where enforcement was difficult and attention was dangerous. The Pirate Bay chose the opposite approach. When copyright holders sent cease and desist letters, the founders did not comply. They did not negotiate. They did not quietly remove the offending content. They published the letters on their website with mocking responses attached. A letter from DreamWorks demanding removal of a film torrent received a reply noting that Swedish law did not recognize the claims being made. A threat from a major record label was answered with an invitation to pursue legal action in Swedish courts. Each exchange was posted publicly, transforming legal intimidation into entertainment for the site's growing user base. This strategy was deliberate. The founders understood that visibility provided a form of protection. A site operating in the shadows could be quietly eliminated. A site operating in public view with millions of users and international media coverage could not be shut down without consequences. Every takedown demand they mocked attracted more users. Every legal threat they published generated more publicity. By 2005, the Pirate Bay had become more than a tracker. It had become a symbol. The site's technical infrastructure evolved alongside its cultural significance. Frederick Ney designed systems that distributed the platform across multiple servers in multiple locations. The site maintained constant backups. The codebase was simple enough to be redeployed rapidly if any single component failed. The architecture assumed that attacks would come and plan for survival rather than prevention. Traffic continued climbing. Millions of users visited daily. Thousands of new torrents were being uploaded every hour. The Pirate Bay became the largest torrent tracker in the world, processing more file-sharing activity than all its competitors combined. Hollywood noticed. The Motion Picture Association of America had spent years fighting digital piracy through legal action, lobbying, and technological countermeasures. They had shut down Napster. They had pursued individual file sharers in American courts. They had pressured internet service providers to monitor and restrict user activity. But the Pirate Bay represented a different challenge. The site operated from Sweden, beyond the direct jurisdiction of American courts. Swedish law at the time did not clearly criminalize the operation of a torrent tracker. The founders were not hiding. They were publicly identifiable, giving interviews and attending conferences. The MPAA concluded that eliminating the Pirate Bay required political pressure rather than legal action. Lobbyists contacted the U.S. State Department. Diplomatic communications emphasized the importance of intellectual property protection to American economic interests. Swedish officials received inquiries about their government's commitment to international copyright agreements. The pressure was mounting. The founders sensed it but did not fully appreciate its intensity. They believed Swedish law protected them. They believed public support insulated them. They believed that a website could not be destroyed by governments designed to regulate physical territory. They were about to be tested. The campaign against the Pirate Bay operated on multiple fronts simultaneously. In Washington, the Motion Picture Association of America compiled a detailed report characterizing the Pirate Bay as an industrial-scale piracy operation causing billions of dollars in losses to American entertainment companies. The report was delivered to the Office of the United States Trade Representative, which added Sweden to its priority watch list, a designation suggesting the country was failing to protect American intellectual property interests. The designation carried implicit consequences: trade relationships, diplomatic cooperation, economic agreements. Sweden was a small country dependent on international commerce. American displeasure was not a trivial concern. In Stockholm, Swedish officials found themselves caught between legal constraints and diplomatic pressure. The country's copyright laws were ambiguous regarding torrent trackers. The Pirate Bay did not host copyrighted content. It hosted references, small files containing metadata that allowed users to locate content distributed across the BitTorrent network. Whether facilitating access to infringing material constituted a crime was an unsettled legal question. Prosecutors hesitated. Politicians equivocated. The situation remained unresolved through 2004 and 2005. Then the communications intensified. Internal Swedish government documents, later obtained through Freedom of Information requests, revealed the nature of the pressure being applied. American officials had contacted Swedish counterparts directly. Conversations referenced iChip-related piracy issues and expectations regarding enforcement. The tone was diplomatic, but the implication was clear. Action was expected. Swedish prosecutors began preparing a case. The investigation was not publicized. Officers gathered intelligence on the Pirate Bay's hosting arrangements. They identified the data center where the primary servers were located, a facility called Riksport 80 in Stockholm. They mapped the network architecture. They prepared for a large-scale seizure operation. The founders remained unaware of how advanced the preparations had become. They had received warnings before, legal threats, political statements, media coverage suggesting that enforcement was imminent. Each warning had passed without consequence. They had grown accustomed to existing under threat. Peter Sunde later described the period as one of confident defiance. The founders believed that Swedish law was on their side. They believed that international pressure would not translate into domestic action. They believed that the political cost of raiding a popular website would deter authorities from acting. They were wrong. In late May 2006, prosecutors secured authorization for a coordinated seizure operation. The warrant was broad. It authorized officers to confiscate any equipment that might contain evidence related to copyright infringement facilitation. 53 officers were assigned to the operation. The scale was unprecedented for a copyright case. The resources deployed suggested authorities were pursuing a dangerous criminal organization rather than a group of activists running a website. On the evening of May 30th, 2006, the operation was finalized. Officers received their assignments. Equipment was prepared. The raid would commence at dawn. The founders went to sleep not knowing that in a few hours, armed police would be pulling their servers from the walls. At 6 a.m. on May 31, 2006, police vehicles converged on the Riksport 80 data center in Stockholm. Officers secured the perimeter. Technicians working the night shift were ordered to step away from their stations. The building was locked down. The warrant authorized seizure of equipment associated with the Pirate Bay, but the data center hosted dozens of clients. Server racks stood in rows, cables intertwined, hardware unmarked with ownership information visible to officers unfamiliar with the technical environment. The operation became a systematic sweep. Officers moved rack by rack, disconnecting servers and loading them into evidence vehicles. When they could not immediately determine which equipment belonged to the Pirate Bay and which belonged to unrelated businesses, they seized everything in proximity. By mid-morning, the scope of the confiscation had expanded far beyond the original target. 65 servers were removed from the facility. The majority had no connection to the Pirate Bay. Dozens of legitimate businesses lost access to their systems. E-commerce platforms went offline. Corporate email servers disappeared. Customer databases became inaccessible. The collateral damage would later become a significant element of the public backlash. But in the immediate aftermath, authorities focused on their primary accomplishment. The Pirate Bay was offline. Prosecutors held a press conference. They announced that the operation had been successful. They described the seizure as a decisive blow against digital piracy. They expressed confidence that the site would not return. Hollywood studios released statements celebrating the outcome. The MPAA declared that the raid demonstrated international commitment to intellectual property protection. Media coverage framed the operation as the end of an era. The founders were questioned, but not immediately arrested. Gottfried Svartholm was abroad when the raid occurred. Fredrik Nye and Peter Sunde were interviewed by police and released. Authorities believed they had eliminated the technical infrastructure. The human elements could be addressed through subsequent legal proceedings. The internet reacted with a mixture of mourning and defiance. Forums filled with tributes to the Pirate Bay. Other torrent sites posted messages of solidarity. Users who had depended on the platform for years expressed grief at its apparent demise. But something else was happening simultaneously. Within hours of the raid, the founders had begun communicating through alternative channels. They were not panicking. They were not grieving. They were executing a plan. The Pirate Bay had been prepared for this moment. The founders had always understood that physical infrastructure was vulnerable. Servers could be seized, data centers could be raided, hardware could be confiscated. Any system dependent on specific machines in specific locations could be eliminated by sufficient force. So, they had built a system that was not dependent on specific machines in specific locations. The Pirate Bay's codebase was simple. The software required to run a torrent tracker was not complex. It could be installed on any server with adequate bandwidth and storage. The challenge was not technical sophistication, but operational resilience. The founders maintained backups, multiple copies of the site's database. The index of torrents, user information, and configuration files existed on servers outside Sweden. These backups were updated regularly. They were distributed across different hosting providers in different countries. When the Stockholm servers went offline, the backup systems remained intact. Within hours of the raid, the founders contacted sympathetic hosting providers abroad. Offers of assistance arrived from around the world. Activists, technologists, and ordinary users volunteered bandwidth, hardware, and expertise. The rebuilding began immediately. New servers were configured in the Netherlands. The database backups were restored. The site's domain name was redirected to the new infrastructure. Technical problems that had plagued the original setup were addressed during the reconstruction. On June 2, 2006, 72 hours after the raid, the Pirate Bay returned online. The site that reappeared was not diminished, it was improved. The new infrastructure was faster than the original. The hosting was distributed across multiple jurisdictions. The system was more redundant, more resilient, more difficult to target, and the user base exploded. The raid had generated international media coverage. Millions of people who had never heard of the Pirate Bay learned of its existence through news reports about its supposed destruction. When the site returned, curiosity drove traffic to unprecedented levels. Within a week, the Pirate Bay had more users than before the raid. The founders understood the significance immediately. Peter Sunde gave interviews explaining what had happened. The physical servers were gone, but the system had survived. The raid had proven that the Pirate Bay could not be killed through conventional enforcement. The model had been validated under the most extreme conditions possible. The site's new logo featured a pirate ship with a Hollywood logo in its crosshairs. The message was clear. The raid had been a declaration of war, and the Pirate Bay had won the first battle. Authorities recognized that something had fundamentally changed. Seizing servers in one country was meaningless if the site could reappear in another country within hours. Traditional enforcement required physical control over physical infrastructure. The Pirate Bay had demonstrated that digital infrastructure could be distributed beyond any single jurisdiction's reach. The conflict would have to move from data centers to courtrooms. The criminal prosecution of the Pirate Bay's founders began in February 2009. The charges were carefully constructed. Prosecutors did not accuse the founders of direct copyright infringement. They had not personally copied or distributed protected content. Instead, they were charged with assisting copyright infringement by operating a platform that enabled others to share copyrighted material. The distinction was significant. The case would test whether facilitating access to infringing content carried the same legal weight as the infringement itself. The defendants were Gottfried Svartholm, Fredrik Nye, Peter Sunde, and Carl Lundström, a Swedish businessman who had provided early financial support and hosting for the site. Each faced potential prison sentences and substantial financial damages if convicted. The trial attracted global attention. Journalists from dozens of countries filled the courtroom. Supporters gathered outside the Stockholm District Court. The proceedings were covered in real time by technology publications, mainstream media, and thousands of bloggers following every development. The prosecution's case was straightforward. The Pirate Bay had knowingly facilitated massive copyright infringement. The founders had received takedown requests and refused to comply. They had publicly mocked rights holders. They had built a system specifically designed to enable the distribution of copyrighted content without authorization. The defense countered on technical grounds. A torrent tracker, they argued, did not store copyrighted content. It stored only metadata, small files containing information about where content could be found. The actual infringing files existed on individual users' computers, distributed across the world. The Pirate Bay was an index, not a repository. The argument was technically accurate, but legally untested. Swedish courts had not previously ruled on whether operating a tracker constituted criminal facilitation. As the trial progressed, evidence emerged that shifted public perception. Leaked diplomatic cables revealed the extent of American pressure on Swedish officials. Communications between the U.S. Embassy in Stockholm and Swedish ministers showed that the raid had been influenced by international political considerations rather than purely domestic law enforcement priorities. One cable, later published by WikiLeaks, documented a conversation in which Swedish officials acknowledged that enforcement against the Pirate Bay was expected as part of maintaining positive trade relations with the United States. The revelation fueled accusations that the prosecution was politically motivated. Supporters argued that Swedish sovereignty had been compromised. Critics of the case suggested that the founders were being prosecuted not because Swedish law clearly prohibited their activities, but because powerful foreign interests demanded action. The court was unmoved. On April 17, 2009, the verdict was delivered. All 4 defendants were found guilty of assisting copyright infringement. Each received prison sentences ranging from 4 months to 1 year. They were jointly ordered to pay damages of 30 million Swedish kroner, approximately $3.6 million, to the entertainment companies that had filed civil claims. The defendants announced immediate appeals, but the verdict changed nothing about the Pirate Bay itself. Throughout the trial, the site had continued operating. New administrators had assumed technical responsibilities. The infrastructure had been further distributed. By the time the founders were convicted, their personal involvement in day-to-day operations had already diminished. The court could imprison the founders. It could not imprison the system they had created. The appeals process extended for years. Swedish appellate courts upheld the convictions in 2010, increasing some sentences while reducing the damages award. The founders pursued further appeals to the Supreme Court, which declined to hear the case in 2012. The legal options were exhausted. The founders faced their sentences. Fredrik Nye served 10 months in a Swedish prison. Peter Sunde served 5 months. Gottfrid Svartholm's situation became more complicated. He had fled to Cambodia before his sentence was finalized and was eventually arrested there in 2012 on unrelated hacking charges before being extradited to Sweden to serve his time. Carl Lundstrom, the financial backer, served his sentence and withdrew from public involvement in piracy-related activities. The founders' lives diverged after prison. Peter Sunde became an activist and entrepreneur, focusing on privacy technology and internet freedom advocacy. He ran for European Parliament. He founded a secure messaging service. He continued speaking publicly about digital rights and the lessons of the Pirate Bay. Fredrik Nye relocated to Southeast Asia, living quietly and avoiding the spotlight that had defined his years running the site. Gottfrid Svartholm faced additional legal troubles. After serving his Swedish sentence, he was extradited to Denmark on charges relating to hacking government databases. He spent years moving through various legal systems before eventually being released. The founders' personal stories became footnotes to a larger phenomenon. The Pirate Bay continued operating without them. The site passed through multiple administrations. Anonymous volunteers assumed technical and operational responsibilities. Hosting shifted between countries as legal pressure mounted in each location. The platform moved from Sweden to the Netherlands, then to various Caribbean nations, then to servers distributed across multiple jurisdictions simultaneously. Each relocation made the site harder to target. Each legal action prompted technical adaptations. The infrastructure that had survived the 2006 raid continued evolving, becoming more distributed, more redundant, more resistant to centralized attack. By 2015, the Pirate Bay had been raided multiple times in multiple countries. Its founders had been imprisoned. Its domain had been seized and transferred repeatedly. International law enforcement agencies had coordinated efforts to eliminate it. The site remained online. The persistence defied conventional understanding of how enforcement worked. Physical raids could seize hardware, court orders could block domains, prison sentences could punish individuals, but none of these mechanisms could eliminate a system that had no fixed physical location, no irreplaceable individuals, and no single point of failure. The Pirate Bay had become a distributed organism. Its survival no longer depended on any specific server, any specific administrator, or any specific country's tolerance. It existed across the network itself, replicated and mirrored and cached in ways that made comprehensive elimination effectively impossible. As of 2025, the Pirate Bay remains accessible. The site has been raided, blocked, and legally attacked in dozens of countries. Its founders served prison sentences. Its original infrastructure was destroyed multiple times. Its domains have been seized and transferred and seized again. None of it mattered. The lesson was structural. The Pirate Bay was never just a website. It was a test of whether the internet could be controlled by institutions designed to control physical territory. The raid of May 31, 2006 answered that question. The answer was more complicated than anyone expected.